Welcome. My name is Iyabo Boyd. I'm the founder and director of Brown Girls Doc Mafia. It's our pleasure to host this Q&A, this event tonight for the film Through the Night, directed and produced by Lloyd Um, Brown Girls Doc Mafia is an initiative and a collective that advocates for over 4,000 women and non-binary people of color. Working in the documentary industry and media at large, we fight inequality by building community and sharing resources, nourishing our creative brilliance, demanding access and visibility in creative and professional environments, and enriching our community with the knowledge to sustain ourselves financially, and to cut through oppressive industry structures to advocate for our members. It is our pleasure to be here to welcome you all and to celebrate this moment that this film is happening, celebrate these filmmakers who are staunch members of Brown Girls, who I've had the pleasure of being in a relationship with as friends for a long time, and as professional colleagues. And it's so wonderful to see this film take off and seeing it fly. And here's to a new 2020 with this film leading the way for Brown Girls. So my pleasure to introduce your moderator for tonight, Geeta Gandbhir. Geeta is an award-winning director, producer, and editor. As a director, she won the 2019 Best Documentary at the News and Docs Emmys for I Am Evidence, an HBO documentary film, and the 2019 Best Government and Politics documentary for Armed with Faith, a PBS documentary film. Take it away, Geeta.
Hi, so thank you so much for being here, everyone. And Iyabo, thank you for that generous introduction. I cannot think of anywhere I'd rather be than here tonight in conversation with these amazing women who I'm going to introduce to you. So Lloyd is the producer, director of Through the Night, the film we're going to be talking about, and the SVP of programs at Firelight Media. Hi, Lloyd. And Malika Zuhaliwaral, which I hope I said that right, is an editor and a director. Her previous directing credits include Call Me Kuchu, Thank You for Playing, and more recently, Strange Grace, The Art of Amira Leon. Again, feel free to correct anything I mangled there, Malika. Did I do okay? Okay. So I am, like I said, there is nowhere I'd rather be, than here with you all tonight in conversation about your incredible feature film, which is up for an award with the IDA for best editing. Correct? Well, that's what that is. And has been doing incredibly well. And just out in the world. And I have to say, I was in watching the film, I was so deeply moved. To me, it is a beautiful celebration of BIPOC women, again, of strength and unity, and them essentially, and also an incredible story of love and compassion. And it's something that we need much more of in this, in this time that we are living through. But Lola, I'd love to hear from you what your essentially your vision was for this film. Why this topic, and what is the film about for you?
Sure. Well, first off, hello, everyone, and thank you, Geeta, for agreeing to be in conversation with us tonight. I'm a huge fan of you and your work, so this is a real pleasure. And also thank you to Iyabo for joining us for the introduction, and to Brown Girls for hosting us tonight. The support really, really means a lot, releasing a film in these like virtual times where you can't really ever watch it with people, or in community, makes all of the kind of moments of connection that much more meaningful. So I just want to really extend my gratitude to you all for being here tonight. And in terms of the vision for the film, I think you've captured some of what the vision was already in your impressions of it. I think I was aiming to at once make something that would feel like a love letter to women of color, really specifically low income and working class Black and Latina women, the women that I grew up with, essentially the women who are my family and my neighbors. So it was, wanting to create something that would feel like a love letter to them, something that could really bear witness to their everyday lives and feeling like they and we deserve, right, that reflection of our everyday lives. And also wanting to make something that could expose the cruelty and the violence of the way that capitalism functions in the United States. And that it could do that in a way that, for me, it was sort of like wanting to create almost like a foolproof argument. Like this is evidence that you cannot argue against, as you watch people living and working and the way that they're doing so, is really tantamount to cruelty, in my mind. So that was a lot of what, I was hoping um, to portray in the film.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that comes across so powerfully. And so I realize for folks who may not have seen the film yet, Through the Night, again, it's a portrait of, it's a beautiful verite film of three women. And maybe, do you want to describe it a little bit for
Sure.
everyone? I think you can probably do it better than me.
So I'd be happy to. Yeah, so the film follows three women whose lives intersect at a 24-hour daycare center. So we follow Nunu, who is the co-founder. She, along with her husband, have been caring for children of working families for over 20 years on their first floor of their home. So this is really home-based childcare facility. And then we follow Marisol, who in the film we meet her. She's working three jobs to kind of make ends meet, and she's a single mother of two young girls. And we also spend time with Shanona Tate, who is a pediatric ER nurse who works the night shift and is also a single mother of two children. And their children attend the daycare. And so the film really is a portrait of their lives, over the course of a few years, and sort of all the rhythms, and all the things of their everyday lives.
Right. And you followed not just in their lives, you also see their children grow up in the care of both Nunu and then, their homes with their mothers. But then Nunu is this sort of central, amazing matriarchal figure who, is not only had her own children to raise, but is raising all these other kids and is almost really the heart, the heart of if you think of this as sort of like an ecosystem, she's the heart of this ecosystem and such a powerful resource for so many folks, but that so many of these women, but at the same time, her own self-care is obviously in that is challenged. But so I'd love to talk to you. Can you tell us, how did you find these amazing women? What was the journey like to connect with them and get them to trust you and also let them be around? I mean, I'm sorry, to get people to film in a school or a daycare. Anyone who's a filmmaker knows the access to a school or a daycare, that's two of the hardest things. So how did you gain the access and the trust?
Yeah, so I learned about the daycare through an article that I read that was shared in an online mothers group that I'm a part of. I myself am a mother. I'm a single mother of two young children. And so I'm in mommy spaces quite often. And someone shared an article that was sort of looking at the fact that in the US, people increasingly have to work more than one job to make ends meet. And that a lot of times those jobs require overnight hours, irregular hours, that you have schedules that shift from day to day, and posing the question of, given this reality, who then takes care of people's children? And so they, there's a lot of statistics about labor and our economy and all of those things, and also profiled the daycare that is featured in Through the Night. And when I read the stories in the article, I was immediately like taken right back to being, 9 and 10 years old myself, because I was raised by a single, working mother in the Bronx who worked the night shift. My mother worked as a home health aide, so she was also a caregiver, making minimum wage, raising 4 kids in New York City on her own, does not speak English fluently. And so, there were a lot of struggles, on a regular basis. And as the oldest child in the family, we're 4 girls, I'm the oldest. I became her right hand, at a young age. And so I had, this real kind of, firsthand view into what she was juggling and just how hard it was for her, and how she was often placed in the position of having to make impossible decisions just to like live, right? And just to take care of us. And so this article, like, in this very visceral way, brought me back to this part of my life that I hadn't necessarily revisited for a long time. And, as a filmmaker, I immediately thought this would make a great film, because, the subsequent thought was, this is not only my mother's story, but it's the story of so many women of color. And it's a story that's invisible. We don't really see these realities, right? Or these parts of our lives portrayed all that often. And if they are, they're usually done in ways that to me feel reductive, or that kind of make caricatures out of our lives. And so that's where the sort of, I kind of became captivated by this idea. And then I reached out to someone who had worked on the article, who I knew, since this was shared in this like online mothers group. I reached out. I said, I actually make documentary films. Would you make an introduction? I think this would make a great film. And she said no. She didn't feel comfortable making the introduction because she had felt that in the process of working with the daycare owners and the families, that they had been very guarded. She thought that they were, cautious, and that she didn't think that they would be open to the idea of a documentary film. So she wasn't, she was like, I'm not gonna broker this introduction.
It's not
And I
gonna
was
be.
like, all right. Yeah, she was like, it's not gonna be me. And I was like, all right, well, I tried. She said no, oh well. And I kind of let it go. Uh, and then, over time, I would think about it. I'd be like washing dishes, and I'd have a thought about this idea, this film. Or sometimes I got to the point where I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking about, like this film and these women and these children and these stories. And so finally, 2 years later, basically, I cold called the daycare, and I got Nunu on the phone and just sort of introduced myself, and said, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I'd be interested in proposing to you. Would you take a meeting with me? And she said, I'll talk to my husband and I'll get back to you. And she called me back a few days later, and I went up to visit and to meet them, and spent a few hours with them. And in that first conversation, Nunu agreed. She was like, yeah, let's do this. And for her, a lot of the motivation for agreeing to work on the film was really wanting to, in her words, like show the world what her mothers are up against. Because she's there with them, and she's like, people have a lot of opinions and a lot of criticism to lob around and lots of things to say, but people don't really know, right? Like what my mothers are up against. So, that was one of her primary motivations for agreeing to do it. And I think, I also shared quite a bit about my own, experiences as a working mother. I shared a bit of my childhood and my mother's experiences, and explained that that was really what was animating my desire to make this film. And that as such, I understood the sensitivity around working with people's children, and that any sort of parameters or limits that they needed to put into place in order to make sure that people felt comfortable would be respected. And I did my best to sort of reassure her that, that's the way that we would approach the process.
Hmm. No, and I think, I mean, honestly, I can imagine like five minutes with Nunu, like after seeing her on the screen for 5 minutes, herself and her partner Patrick, who, run this the daycare together. You really just, after watching them for 10 minutes, it's like I wanted them to adopt me. Like you just feel
Me
like they
too. Me
are.
too.
I was like, can I somehow, like, how do I? My children are too old for daycare, but I was like, how do I get in on this? Because she is, they are just such, again, like, and the fact that they are so so generous and so warm, and the family that they've created out of what Nuna refers to as our mothers, right? Like her mothers. I think that is that attitude again of it being a community and communal responsibility to, again, care for not just the children as a business, but to care for each other holistically is something that they are organically doing. And that was so powerful to me. So
Yeah. Can I just say on that point that, I've told Nunu and Patrick this many times, and I've said it in public a few times, is that what they do is nothing short of providing a complete safety net for an entire community.
that's right.
uh and it's amazing, and it's like you say, something that needs to be celebrated, and something that we need to remind ourselves of, particularly as we're like in these moments of, political theatrics and absurdity, and things like that, is that we are alive and we are here in spite of them, not
Insight.
because of them, never because of them. We are here, we are alive because Nunu and Patrick and all the caregivers in our communities have determined that our lives are worthy of care, right? And that they're full of possibility. And that's what Nunu and Patrick have done for generations of this entire community. It's a complete safety net. It's childcare plus, 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 you
Right.
know?
Plus food, plus Christmas presents, plus, yeah, it's put so many
It's
things.
so
And
it's support.
that's it.
Nunu has gone into schools with mothers who are having issues with the administration to advocate on behalf of a child. If a family is facing housing insecurity, guess who's on the phone? Nunu and Patrick. If a family is facing food insecurity, right? Like it's all the things that folks need, and that, unfortunately, our systems refuse to provide to
Right.
working people.
Right. And the fact that it's falling on the backs of, I mean, obviously the fact that they're doing it is heroic, but the fact that it is falling on their backs, as just a couple, who are also trying to get by as well, is like you said, is shameful. When you look
Mhm.
at our administration, when you look at the way that capitalism works, when you look at all the systemic issues at hand. And I think the film that you two have created, it touches on all of those issues as well in a very organic way, right? You can see that you see that one of the mothers is struggling to find one job that can cover all her bills, and she cannot. And so she's working 2 to 3 jobs all the time, around the clock, and is away from her children. Like, how is that in any way, like they are providing a social safety net, as you said, that should be provided by our society and has been denied them. So, and it should not be Nunu's job. It should not be Patrick's job. But
That's right.
you know, but
Right.
again, these are folks who are doing heroic work. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we obviously we should emulate this everywhere. You know, we can, like, we should emulate them as obviously, but at the same time, we shouldn't be fall on regular folks to
Right.
do.
And then, yeah. And then if they're doing this work, then at the very least, we should respect them. We
Yes,
should
we should celebrate.
resource them.
Yes,
Right. And we don't do that either. Right.
that's true.
Because we applaud, these empty symbolic gestures of gratitude that we give as a society to caregivers and to essential workers, who, by the way, everyone in the film is an essential worker. Before we had that language, we do these very empty symbolic gestures, but we do not compensate people. We don't take care of them. We don't respect them. We treat their lives and their labor as if it's small and insignificant. And in this moment, we're seeing quite the opposite, that these people that we've treated as small and insignificant are literally the people that do the work that keeps the society running in times of crisis. When it all hits the fan, we actually need them more than anybody else,
That's right. They are the backbone of the society. They're the backbone, and yeah, they are, as you said, they are absolutely, they are essential. They are the most needed, right? And well, I think the film does a beautiful job of showing that in an incredibly organic way. And Malika, I want to turn to you, because obviously you too are you are a parent, and you are a mother. And how did you come to work with Lloyd on the film, and why were you drawn to it?
Yeah, well, I think Lloyd at first told me about the film when we were just riding in a taxi together, and it was when she was she first kind of, I don't know how recently, Lloyd, you'd read the article, but it was before Lloyd had started filming, and I just remember that the way she described it, and the way she described the daycare and the verite approach, I was just immediately so compelled. I think I was really interested in this idea of being able to explore so many essential ideas and themes that are so crucial to accurately analyze our society and economy, and the brutality of it, but simultaneously celebrate love and joy that can be created in a space. And the idea that all of that could be examined through the lens of this one place, I think really excited me from an editing point of view, in terms of how you can use the images and moments from within that space to convey that. So I think I was just like, Lloyd, if you ever need anything edited for that, please get in touch. And then I think like a year later, maybe, Lloyd had reached out, and we had a maybe slightly unconventional process, which is that I started editing footage from after the very first shoot that Lloyd did, which is a process I love, both as an editor and for films I'm directing. But I know not all editors love that. Some editors prefer to be able to see all the footage at once. But I kind of loved the idea that I was kind of involved and in dialogue with Lloyd during that production process. And I remember I think something that I found very compelling, and that I think about a lot, was that the very first shoot was of a kind of party-like event that's very similar to the event that happens at the end of the film. It was like a graduation event for the kids in the daycare, and Lloyd shot that with 90 Gammas, who shot a lot of the film. And I remember when I first saw that footage, I was just like really blown away by how immediately obvious the love was in like every single image in that footage. so it was also really interesting that like one of the first things that came across was this idea of love, and I remember Lloyd and I talking about it, and I just was very aware that that felt like a very unique approach to a film, like, you know, especially a documentary film. Like I feel like figuring out how you represent love in a documentary film was a really intriguing idea to me, but I was already seeing it in the footage, so it was also a very motivating idea, because I was like, great, let's go and like let's get going on like figuring that out within this, and yeah, and then it kind of just went on from there. But I know that really from the moment Lloyd had told me about it, and then from the moment I saw the first day of footage, I was very excited about it. I knew there was a lot there cinematically.
Yeah, and so there really is a lot there cinematically. I think the verite allows you to feel incredibly embedded, right? That you are in the daycare, which is, you know, sometimes really crowded and chaotic. And, you know, and it's funny, when I was in there, I had flashbacks of, you know, my own experience, like in, you know, with my children and the childcare, and, you know, the picking up and the dropping off, and just the noise, right, and sort of the controlled chaos, right, and managing all those different kids in there, you know, their personalities and their needs, and the children. I'm interested in how you dealt with. Lloyd talked a little bit about, you know, managing getting access to the children, but how you sort of decided, you know, there was sort of a balance of adults and kids, right? And then the kids, some of the children actually play a role. How did you all decide, you know, like you know, were there children that just stood out, or what was the process around figuring out? Because it was a lot of kids, you know, obviously you have the kids of the main characters, but then there's some other kids who factor in as well, or the main participants, I should say. Just interested in that.
Do you
Yeah,
want to answer
I mean,
that first, Lloyd?
You can both.
yeah, I
however
can.
you
Yeah, I
want.
can start, but I would say the process was pretty organic. I also want to say that Nunu is on Facebook with us tonight, so huge hugs and lots of love to you, Nunu. I hope you're all doing well.
No, I want you to adopt me. I want you to adopt
Everybody wants Nunu to adopt them, me
I want
included. It was so one, I would say a lot of how the relationships developed, you know, and were nurtured and cultivated, both with Marisol and Shanona, who are the two mothers who we follow primarily, and the children, was all via Nunu and Patrick, really. So I do want to lift up the fact that I've sort of joked and said that Nunu was the casting agent, because when we talked about making the film, I said, this is why I want to make it, and this is what I'm hoping to portray. Why are you saying yes to this? And she told me her reasons, and then based on that, you know, we started coming up with lists of the types of people or themes or scenes that we would need to capture in order, you know, to speak to these themes and these sort of larger goals that we both had. And so Nunu off jump was like, I think you should talk to this mother, this mother, this mother, and this mother. She like named 4 people. And it sort of happened that the first 2 people that I spoke with were Marisol and Shanona. And there was a rapport and there was an ease of kind of conversation there, that and they were also sort of clear at the outset of like why they would want to participate. And that felt just very, you know, just felt like it all fell into place pretty organically. For me, the piece about all of them being clear about what it is that they wanted to say was really important, because then for me it was like they are enthusiastic partners, right? Like I'm not cajoling or convincing or coaxing anybody, you know, into anything. And so that just sort of happened that way. And then obviously their children, and part of the reason, for example, that Nunu mentioned the parents that she did was because she knew, right, like with this parent, we can capture this piece, right? Like, you know, Shanona's children sleep at daycare. So then you're able to capture the entire nighttime and morning routine and this sort of thing. And with Marisol is the parent that is working the 3 jobs and that has a kind of schedule that changes, you know, from day to day or week to week and the hours. And so there's that sort of challenge that she's managing, right? It's really specific. And so in this way, we're covering a spectrum of experiences. And so those children, obviously, they come along with the mothers, you know, as a package. And then in the daycare space, there were other children who stood out, right? For just because of their personalities and the things that they had to say, or the role that they played, right? Because that's the other piece that, you know, when people have asked me like, what surprised you the most in your time of filming, I don't know that I was ever surprised fully, but there were definitely many things that stood with me, you know, or that touched me in very, very deep ways. There are many things like that. And one of those is the way in which all of the children that are in Nunu and Patrick's care are experts at caregiving themselves. It doesn't matter how young they are, like everybody in this community is caring for each other, and everyone, you know, sort of understands that that's just what you're supposed to do, right? And so sort of seeing that, you know, so the roles and the personalities that the children played, I think, you know, in a pretty organic way dictated, you know, who we see and when and how in terms of the children.
And no, you can see that with the children. I mean, they are, I mean, obviously they light up the screen, you know, and they're obviously the confidence you see in many of them in that space is powerful, you know, is powerful. The comfort they clearly feel in the space and the ownership of the space and of each other is really powerful. And so for you in the editing process, Malika, how was that? Like, was it, you know, challenging for you? You feel like you had a wealth of stuff or?
I think, I mean, it was largely that there was a wealth of stuff. I mean, it was just such a pleasure. I think I'm like, a part of the reason I was so excited to edit this is a verite film. I'm like very interested in gesture and gesture as a way of telling stories about intimacy, and obviously the Nunu's daycare is just like a wealth of that. So I just really loved kind of screening the footage and looking for those moments that had been captured, you know, for one or both reasons. Either like Naiti, the cinematographer, is brilliant, instinctive cinematographer, and Verite especially, she's really great at. And Lloyd often would go into shoots with some very specific ideas, and so it just meant the stuff, you know, that they were really getting the goods. They were coming back with the goods, so to speak, after every shoot day. And I think I got very compelled by the idea of the characters you can bring out without them having to necessarily set them up as main characters. Like I loved building the people in the film that we would call like the main characters of the story. But then I also got very excited about how, as you're saying, Geeta, these other characters would emerge, and you started to get to know the other kids in the daycare in very intimate ways, and get to know what was important to them, and what you know, what made them happy, or what mattered to them. And then also just to see how Nunu and Patrick kind of run the place in such a incredible way. Like I remember when I first saw the scene where they're tidying up, and I have a lot of difficulty getting my son to tidy up, you know, I try a lot, but it was just so magical to see that scene where you see, as Lloyd was saying, that like Nunu has, you know, is kind of bringing together a community in a way where even the very little kids understand that they're part of community and they have a role to play in terms of picking up these 3 toys and putting them in this basket and then straightening the carpet, and then you know, and then if everyone needs to be quietened down, it happens pretty quickly. So I think I was really compelled and became quite obsessed with those moments, because that was just so fun to figure out like how to really bring them out in the edit. And Lloyd and I would just kind of, you know, spend a lot of time on that. And I think the other thing that was really interesting is I think everyone has a number of people that we get to know in the film that they relate to through different aspects of their lived experience. And I think it was really interesting to see how that also works with the children. And I know there are a number of the children in the film, or pretty much every child in the film, I was relating to, either remembering myself going through something like that child was going through in that scene, or seeing my own kid or my niece and nephew in those children. But it really stuck. Like I was really, as I was editing the film and watching it, I would just be seeing myself going through that moment on my, you know, so, and I get the impression that a lot of people kind of relate to it in that way, because there are universal aspects and very specific aspects, and people kind of come at it in different ways.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing on the children's piece, which is on the audience side. This has been a surprise for me, is that multiple people have told me that they're watching it. You know, I'm able to see everyone is watching it at home, and so families all around. You know, if you are living with family, and for people that have children, the children will come in as they're watching and will stay and you know, even very young children will like watch the whole thing or watch a long part of the film, and parents being surprised, and part of the kind of the feedback has been that for many children, they are like, you know, super focused on these babies that look like them, you know. And that for me, there was like something that clicked again. That was like a bit of a surprise, that, you know, I forget sometimes that our children do not really get to see their everyday lives, not a cartoon, not a superhero, because now we have some representation in those realms, but those lives don't look like your everyday life if you're going to a childcare, you know, facility like Nunu and Patrick's, which many of the children in our communities are. And they don't have mothers that are working the kind of jobs that, you know, our children's mothers are working. And so that proximity, right, of experience and being able to see that kind of reflection of yourself is something that our babies need too. You know, it's not just us that need to see ourselves as adults. And that's been a really pleasant discovery, you know, as the film has been rolling out and screening.
No, that's such a powerful commentary. Again, representation. And I think that, you know, your points about, I just want to reiterate what you said, because that's what's so important. It's like for our kids to see themselves represented on the screen, not, you know, in a sitcom where, you know, everybody's life is perfect, not in, or, you know, or funny, or, you know, not, but to, you know, and again, to see themselves represented in the way their lives actually are, and that there is joy in that, right? There is joy and community and love and growth. And one of the really powerful things about your film too is because you did it over a number of years, I understand, is that you see the children grow up to a certain degree. You see them become older, and that's a really, you know, amazing, powerful thing. Like you feel you are with, you know, these families, and with Patrick and Nunu, who also, I have to say that Patrick and Nunu too themselves have this amazing dynamic that's almost a bit, you know, that can be very, very funny too. Like Patrick, who I'm Nunu, and hopefully Patrick are watching this, but Patrick is hilarious with the kids and his relationship with the kids versus hers. It's such a great, like perfect dynamic. But and you don't see that change even as the kids get older and the kids rely on them. So But that's a really incredible point. I know I'm supposed to ask you about the breathing. I don't know, but I know I'm supposed to ask you about it. So before we go to the Q&A, can you please talk about the breathing, whatever that means?
Yeah, well, the breathing thing that Tony Bell, shout out Tony, who's in the background there, and Nicole Doctor, lurking behind the Zoom screens, making all of this magic happen. What she's referring to is that actually, I don't know, Monica, if you still feel this way, but my recollection of our edit was that the thing that was the most challenging in the editing process was actually finding like the right pacing and rhythm of the film. We at one point had a cut that was, maybe like 80 something minutes. And then we did a lot of editing and all kinds of very rigorous things and feedback and, edit labs and supervising or consulting editors came in and, really kind of put the cut up, for a lot of very rigorous feedback and thinking. And then we ended up at another point with a cut that was like 60 something minutes and was super tight and like very efficient, but like almost soulless,
Well, and just to quickly interrupt, I think we'd solved the kind of skeleton, so to speak, of the film, but had lost a lot of the beauty and lingering that we'd previously had. So
right.
The poetry. That's what.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
it is, yeah. I feel like the film does, and this is one thing that I'm proud of. I do feel like the film creates an opportunity for you to slow down enough to care about these very small, monumental, but small and everyday acts of care that actually make up a life and make up everyday living. And it was really hard to figure out what that rhythm and pacing was. And the thing that actually like helped us get there was one day being in the edit, Malika and I were like sort of looking at these shots and we'd figured out, we wanted to move away from sort of very literal transition shots to get from one scene to the next and to lean more into like emotionally, where are you leaving off? Where do you need to go in order to arrive at the next scene? But really looking at all of that, as an emotional experience and an emotional journey. And in that process, we were like looking at shots and like, okay, that's too long. And we just kind of got into this thing where like, I started kind of like tapping the table and taking breaths, and breathing became like our metronome, if you will, that helped us to figure out how long to hold shots for and things like that. And it worked, And at one point, Monica and I were like looking at each other, like, can't believe we're like literally sitting here, like breathing with each other to figure out this shot length. But here we are. All right, let's just go with it,
Yeah, and it really worked because suddenly we realized that we had got to the point where we were racing through these scenes in terms of like cutting, like from shot to shot. It had been this kind of race because we'd like tightened everything so much, and and then doing the breathing suddenly kind of I remember it was like this amazing luxury because it was like, oh, we can extend this shot this much, and then this shot, once you've, as you know, Geeta, as an editor yourself, like once you start that, you set up that pacing, then you realize everything after that, oh, we can extend that shot and we can extend that shot. And it just was like this magical, luxurious moment of we'd been so caught up in making sure we were only using what we needed to use, but then realizing that the film had to linger and had to find a pace that was more human and not a race. And so Lloyd, with her spiritual and DJ skills combined, brought this beat and this breath that helped so much. Yeah.
That's, I mean, listen, that sounds, listen, y'all are gonna have to brand that. You're gonna have to be like, your breathing technique for editing, right? And you can see glasses on it. Come on, y'all, I see something here, I see something. But I have a vision for this, for a brand around this. I used to count breathing, so I used to count like literally in my head, like 1, 2, but breathing sounds much better and good for your health, your mental health. That's all right. So I'm sure that Nicole is going to kick my butt if we don't move to the Q&A section. And so for folks who are sending in questions, this is the time to do it. You can, and they'll be put into the chat. So this is a question for, I guess, both of you. So Lloyd has talked before about forgoing exposition and instead striving to create a revelation in the audience. So for both of you, either of you, was there a scene in the edit where it was difficult resisting the urge to explain, teach the audience, or go and talking about structure and policy? Like, again, keeping it maybe to the sticking to the organic verite. Show, not tell. Show, not
tell. Yeah. Hi, CJ. That was a question from CJ.
I don't know if I was supposed to call.
I saw it, so I'm just, listen, I'm like yearning to be with people, so I'm not following any rules.
You know, CJ, you can do that.
Yes. So there were often a lot, like as we were editing and showing cuts to like funders or people that we had to show cuts to, or just even for feedback, there were often questions about like the policy stuff, right? And that was, there was a tension. So I would say like the scene that automatically comes to mind where we were, where we wrestled with like what was the primary goal of the scene, and this piece about like exposition was a real tension. There's a scene where you see them, it's a Thanksgiving parade and they're outside in New Rochelle, and you sort of get to see like the entire community, and you get to see their role in the community, right? And that's a scene where we do talk, it's probably like the place where we speak most explicitly about the ways that the government fails our folks. And still we kept it super like light touch, and really kind of coming from Nunu and Patrick's voices, as opposed to trying to explain how childcare works. Are there subsidies? Are there not? Who gets paid what? How, all of the rules and regulations, and what does it cost? And childcare costs more than college tuition in most of the United States. Like, this is a fact. We never say that in the film. It is a fact, but we wrestled with like, should we say this in the film? And ultimately decided not to, because we really, the more that Malika and I talked, the more that we felt like leaning into the emotional experience over the kind of intellectual experience of kind of giving people information. We wanted to lean, sort of on the emotional side, primarily because for me, again, the film, the primary audience is the people in the film. It's the communities that are like the community in the film. This is a film that was first intended as a love letter, for Black and Latina, mothers and caregivers, single mothers, and second as an indictment of, this society and its violence. So because the primary audience are people that know this world intimately, I was like, I don't need to kind of explain a lot of policy stuff, not that that's not important, right? But it wasn't this film, and it wasn't what I was interested in.
Yeah, but also, honestly, sometimes that's what Google is for. That's what Google is for. You can Google it, and your film is a beautiful, again, verite film, which is so much show and not tell, right? And it's very cinematic for that. Oftentimes you can make a cinematic film with, I'm not saying you can't make a cinematic film with policy, but I think your choice allowed us to be embedded with the participants without interruption, without sort of having this extra, the information. We were allowed to kind of live their lives with them, which was a privilege, and an honor. So,
and I think one thing I'd add to that is I think it was also a sense of recognizing if there was something that was interrupting people's connection for multiple viewers in terms of feedback screenings we did, if there was something that kept coming up as in like interrupting people's engagement or immersion in the story, that was when we would try and figure out how to address it. So the example that Lloyd gave was one where after a while we realized like, okay, we've got to answer that question somehow because it keeps coming up. So then we just don't want someone to be distracted from what's happening in a moment. So we found this solution of a way to kind of, as Lloyd has said, kind of address it at least briefly so that it just about answers the questions. They're not like thinking or starting to Google while watching the film, so that they're still kind of fully engaged.
Yeah, no, and that makes so much sense. It's often, you often do get those, right? The common denominator of, when you do repeat screenings, and if you hear the same thing over and over from multiple different people.
Right. I think David Teague says as soon as all the questions are different, then you're fine. But when people have the same question.
Agreed with David. Shout out to David Teague. Okay, so next question, Sky Fitzgerald. Hi, Sky. Hi, Sky. Question for Lloyd. Can you talk about the production timeline for the film, which we didn't really, length of the shoot, how big your crew was? The film is so intimate.
Sure. I'm seeing Tony is saying that several moms are on Facebook as well from these chats. So hello and much love to you all that are joining us. So timeline, we started shooting in 2016. The summer of 2016 was our very first shoot, and we shot most of the film from until about 2018, and then in 2019 did very few like pickup shoots, things that we knew we were missing. Most of those were kind of exterior shots of the community and New Rochelle, the city itself. So the bulk of production was 2016 to 2018, so 2 years primarily. And size of the crew, it was most often, probably I would say like 3 to 4 people max. We had one camera person. Our primary camera folks were Naiti Gamez. And then we had additional cinematography from Noshin, Dada Boy, and Mariam Dewadar. So other brown girls. So shout out to, it's like a whole brown girls production. Everybody that worked on, I mean, also that's important to say.
It can be done.
Everyone that worked on the film was a woman of color, like literally, producers, cinematographers, sound people, editor, everyone. Associate, producer, assistant editor. So just want to say that, that there are a lot of amazing women of color filmmakers that are at the top of their game, and you will only like benefit by working with these brilliant women. Yeah, so I think that answers it, right? Production timeline and size of the crew. Those were the questions, yeah. And then as Malika said, we were editing the whole time, essentially.
I just want to ask you really quickly.
We'll say editing on and off.
Right, yeah, it was, yeah, so that's true. That I would bring footage to Malika when we shot, and we shot only like maybe 22 days. So there wasn't a ton of footage. We were really economical with our approach to production, partially to be respectful of, everyone in the film, their time constraints, right? Like, again, these people are all working around the clock. So we didn't want to, there was no room to be like for excess, any excess would have been irresponsible in my view. And then also I didn't have a lot of time because I'm working a full-time job and raising 2 kids. So in many ways, time was like the scarcest resource for everyone involved in making the film. And so we were very economical in terms of shoot days for a verite film. Yeah.
But and I will say though that again it's kind of unconventional to have an edit spread out over time, but something I love about it is that it can sometimes mean, or often means, that you're then coming back to an edited sequence or to footage after time has passed. And I think I've got a little addicted to having time away from something and then coming back to it, and the revelations that somehow my mind works in a way somehow where that seems to be a particularly creatively productive way to do it. So I will say that I think the result of this process that worked well for Lloyd also worked really well for me as well. And as Lloyd has said, worked well for the people she was filming with. I think there was something very creatively, very productive and positive about it as well. So yeah, I feel like it's what made the film sing, in my opinion. And like what worked well was that time.
Yeah, and just to, I know we're like going on and on and on about this, but this is like something that I think, you know, I've said to Malika, I hope like we can find time to maybe write about the way that we work together, because the approach was great for all the reasons that Malika stated, but it also was great for us because we are mothers. And so, you know, and also Malika is a director producer that has other projects. So it was just sort of like, there was like breathing room in the timeline. And it was like iterative.
It's true.
In a way that allowed us to juggle all the things that we're juggling. And then the fact that we are both mothers of young children, there was no doubt or insecurity or fear or anything about bringing any of our own real world challenges, logistical challenges, because of our mothering. Like we could fully show up with all of that stuff. That is like, I'm like, oh, it's not, you know, because I feel like the paradigm in the United States is that anything that is kind of art or art related is seen as a luxury. And when you're a mother, the paradigm is you're supposed to be a martyr. There is no room for anything that's luxurious, right? Or, you know, your own passions and your own dreams, that has to always, you know, it's supposed to take second or third seat to the primary task of motherhood. And you're told that the conflict is between your dream and motherhood. And the conflict is actually not, I believe, not between those two things. The conflict is between motherhood and the society that is cruel and that values all the wrong things, right? And then is violent. So that's what makes it difficult. But I think we often internalize, and you know, oftentimes what happens is like when people become mothers, they stop doing whatever it is that their passion, you know, if they're an artist, is, right? Like that's like a common story. And I think, you know, the way that we worked created, you know, it just feels like perhaps like a model, you know, for mothers in film and in documentary, you know, to work, where there's enough expansiveness for the mothering to not constantly be at odds with the filmmaking.
I think that's just that what you said is so important. I mean, it sounds like you had an incredibly collaborative but also cooperative experience, you know, where again, like the idea of you know, understanding the person's whole life, like a holistic approach also, and you know, and then cooperating so that everyone could again bring their best, do their best, and you know, but yet not to, you know, to exclusion of any other part of their life, you know. And that, I think right now the model in the US, which is the capitalist model that you mentioned earlier, Lloyd, that this really speaks to, you know, the cruelty, as you said, is that doesn't allow, you know, like again, a living wage, right? Like for baseline, but the whole system essentially is right now. Essentially, the way that it works does, if anything, disenfranchises and devalues the way that you were working, and sort of and that is, there's something kind of revolutionary, I think, about what you guys were doing, and hopefully that can be replicated and more of us can catch on to that. I feel like myself, as if I'm like, I've worked in both. I've had incredibly wonderful experiences and then really awful ones, that were kind of heartbreaking and kept me from my kids, unreasonably.
And I will say quickly that there's like a flip side. So on the one side, it was brilliant because there's this cooperation where we're not afraid to admit that, we need to deal with our kids and we can't get to that piece of work whenever it needs to happen, which is like one pressure, as you're saying, Geeta. So it did mean that like we could say, sorry, I fell asleep while putting my son to bed this evening, so I'm not going to get to it till tomorrow or whatever. So there was that relieved a lot of pressure. And then the flip side, as I'm sure you'll both agree, is I do believe that there's an intense focus and productivity that comes with having kids too, because you suddenly have to get really efficient, and I mean, I don't think there's a hierarchy of these things, but I'm just saying, like, being a parent isn't just about dividing your time, or it isn't just about having less time. There are also ways in which Lloyd would sometimes be so determined to make this film. She would be like so driven and be, sometimes working crazy hours, or I would sometimes work crazy hours, but it was because we really wanted to make it happen. Or the point being, whether or not it was crazy hours, the point being, we just really wanted to make it happen. And so I think there's like, it's not just about having an adjusted schedule where you maybe have a bit less time than before having kids, but I think there's also like a drive that kind of came with wanting to keep this going while having kids as well, that was very productive.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. You guys forgive me, there's some other questions that I don't want to neglect, because I'm sure people want to hear from you all. So there is a question from Babalu. How are Patrick and Nunu doing now with COVID? And are they okay?
Yes. So they are okay. I would say, I know Nunu is on with us. I've heard her say that, they have been really blessed. They are safe. They have kept their doors open this entire time because they care for the children of essential workers. So they are among the few daycares that haven't closed. Many daycares in the US have closed due to the pandemic. Something like upwards of 60% of daycares have closed because childcare providers operate on very thin margins as is, and didn't have the bandwidth to sort of withstand this kind of crisis from a financial point of view. But because they are caring for the children of Marisol, who has been working 6-7 days a week throughout this entire pandemic, she works for a supermarket supplier, and for the children of Shanona, who is a nurse and has been on the front lines of the pandemic, they've been open and are healthy, have not sort of had any direct cases of COVID in their space, and have been able to remain open. But I think it's fair to say they're worn down. They're worn down, and I've also heard Patrick say that it's frustrating to see all this talk of essential workers, and they are often forgotten. There's the nurses and the doctors and the firefighters and the this and the EMTs, and people often forget, right? Like the childcare providers, the home health aides, the janitors, the people working at supermarkets, all of these other folks that are just as important, right, as the nurses and doctors. And we now know this, but we have this hierarchy, right? So we don't treat everyone with equal value, although their lives absolutely have equal value. So yeah, that's a bit of on how they're doing. You're muted.
Muted. Here we go. So there's a question to you about funding. From Cynthia Martinez. Incredible film. Could you share how it was funded? Grants, private donors. Did you pitch the film to get funding? Did you have issues with getting post funding?
Yeah, so most of the funding was raised through grants, and then we got ITVS open call. So that was our biggest sort of batch of money that allowed us to, actually open the edit proper, because Malika and I were kind of editing here and there, on and off, and tidbits, as time became available, as resources became available. And then once we got ITVS finishing funds, we were able to sort of say, okay, now we're gonna open the edit and edit continuously, for X amount of time, and really work towards finishing the film. So that's, and the film is going to be on POV. So it is a PBS film, and we didn't have any private donors, and I didn't do any pitch forums to raise funding for it.
Okay, that's great. And then I think there's a question from Gordon. Do you have any comments from the kids who've been watching the film? And he also said, would love to see them watching. And there's a note to you, which is Nunu said when Shanona's kids were watching, they were talking about how young and small they were during filming. So if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that maybe answers Gordon's question. The kids seem to that's the first thing that they notice is like, oh my God, I was so little, because now they're so, they're big. Like for kids, it's like the difference, a year makes is huge, and they certainly feel like they're in a completely different category year to year. So I think that's been a lot of the feedback. There's also been a lot of laughter around seeing themselves and seeing each other and the things that they say, because they are really funny. And the interactions with Patrick, have been a lot of their focus is how they socialize with each other in that space is where their minds sort of tend to go first.
It's so funny. I can't, it would be so enjoyable. I feel like that maybe you could do sort of a little piece for something, like an excerpt of kids watching themselves, like the kids watching themselves. And
that would be great.
Release that, that would be so cute. Like something for the website, or just to see what their responses are,
We did do a red carpet a few months ago now, I guess, around November. And they all a bunch of the kids got dressed up, and Nunu and Patrick, Marisol was there, her girls were there as well. And that's on our Facebook page. So that was like a nice moment of the children, being able to participate in some of the film's public life. But, we didn't have our vision initially was that everyone from the daycare community would be able to be part of the premiere. That was part of what we were really excited with the film premiering at Tribeca. It was like, it's a New York film. Everyone could be there. The kids could be there. We were talking about offering childcare if parents wanted to watch on their own versus, the children that could join and watch in the theater. Those were our planning conversations, and I know Nunu had an outfit picked out and, all the things. And, so we would have gotten to see the children watching themselves on screen had we had that moment. But, here we are. We're still here. We're still kicking.
Here we are. Curse you, COVID. Oh my gosh. I know still being here is like the most that we can, right? Gotta be thankful. We're still here. But so with that, I think we're basically out of time. I'm being told by the powers that be that that it's time to shut it down. But I'm so grateful to the two of you for this incredible conversation, to hear all your wisdom and your experiences on making this incredible film through the night. And you mentioned that it's going to be on POV. Is there a date for that people should look out for?
Yes, it'll be on POV the day after Mother's Day in May, but May 10th. So it's May 10th, but it is currently playing in virtual cinemas. And so if folks want to watch it, we encourage folks to go to our website, which is just throughthenightfilm.com. And there's a list of the cinemas that it's playing at. You could just choose, whatever cinema you want to watch it through, which is a nice way to support a local theater too in these times.
Yeah, that's a great option. And so, thank you for this beautiful film and, your contribution to the world. I feel like this is an amazing contribution to the world. And I hope as many people that can see it do see it. And Nunu, who you're watching, thank you so much for everything you're doing. And yeah, I hope everybody gets to see it. So, all right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Geeta. Take care. Bye.